Our topic for today is how boards can empower positive working cross-generationally. And our speaker is Rebecca Robbins. Rebecca works with organisations through the lenses of brand, culture and leadership. As we have 5 generations at work for the first time in history, her research and work has evidenced how we can translate our generational diversity into more collaborative, competitive organisations. She has over 20 years' experience working with leading businesses from across the world, from Lego to Louis Vuitton. Rebecca teaches on leadership programs at leading business schools and universities, including Cambridge, Oxford, and is an advisor for Quilt.Ai, heralded by the Economist as an AI for good pioneer. We need to hear about that right now. She is the author of 3 best-selling novels, but most recently and interestingly for today is this one, 5 Generations at Work. 5 Generations at Work. She is known for her problem solving, collaboration, and creativity, and an engaging way of working. Education is at the beating heart of her purpose, including serving as an advisory board member at the Chartered Management Institute and board trustee at the EY Foundation. And she wrote the book alongside Patrick Doon, who you might remember came to speak to us before. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us, especially when this book has not long been out. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone for being on today's session. I'll keep it hopefully power-packed and punchy in the 10 minutes that we have, and then look forward to opening out into questions. And I think importantly, and a huge thanks to you, Sarah, because what you brought together is a really powerful community, connecting brilliant minds over the conversations that matter. And to that point, and thank you for mentioning the book, this really felt like a moment in time where there was a lot of urgency behind my getting what is now my 3rd book out into the world. And a big part of that was how I need to be part of the solution. And I'll just share a little bit of context before I wanted to share sort of 3 points that will hopefully give us some food for thought as we go into the breakouts. So a few years ago, and this was happening over a period of time, I started to see some patterns in the conversations that I was having with the organizations that I was working with, in what they were seeing in their organizations, from how we engage our talent, from a lot around younger generations rising into the workplace, to how we better connect employee experience and consumer experience. So that's the first point. There was a second point around the patterns I was seeing, which was, and again, I'm sure this will resonate with everybody on this call right now, which is, and it's probably hit, let's hope it has a hit peak moment, which is the discourse in the media and that's driven through marketing. Because of course, with the arrival of Gen Z came a new target in the quest by brands for consumer relevance and spend, perhaps even more alarmingly, reaching down to our Gen Alphas, so all the way down to 7-year-olds on TikTok as beauty influencers. And again, I'm sure we've all seen some of what's proliferating. The problem is, and I think this has become really exacerbated, and I saw this in the research over the past 2 years, the media is constantly proliferating a really negatively loaded discourse around generations and generational divides. A lot of it, frankly, is feeding and perpetuating stereotypes and actually overhyping problems where they do exist. And so the third point and the context and what I was seeing and perhaps motivations behind writing the book was that at the same time and through all of this, so on the one hand, really interesting conversations with organizations around what they were looking to do in their organizations, and work that was evidenced that, and across different sectors, different shapes and sizes of organizations, from nonprofits to global corporates to education to other institutions. It was something altogether more progressive in the context of the generational diversity of having 5 generations at work. So that was a lot of what was building up over the years leading up to saying this is absolutely a book. And when I realized it was a book, really sort of put the foot down in terms of really conducting a mix of qual, quant, and AI powered research. So I thought in the time that we've got today, probably the next 7 to 8 minutes in our 10-minute window, I wanted to share 3 important things. First of all, the context and why this moment matters, but also just, I think, really to put some clarity on what we're engaging with and why. The second point is really around the opportunity. I thought I'd share some food for thought with some examples that are evidenced in the book, why these are working, and importantly, why they are sustainable solutions. I think what you hear from a lot of the organizations around generational topics, let's say, or the 5-generation workplace, there's a lot of conversations around projects and initiatives. And actually what we're seeing is there's fatigue with projects and initiatives in organizations. So this is really looking at how do we sustain change through doing things better, and actually doing fewer things better and sustain them over time. And then just point 3 was actually big thing around writing the book is how am I part of the solution, and therefore really empowering all of us to be part of the solution. So how can we put more tangible things in everyone's hands to say, this is a business case for taking this to our boards, to our leadership teams, whatever those conversations might be, to say we have nudged the needle actually, and over the next 2 to 3 years, something has changed. So that was really ambition. So to go back to point one, the context. So for the first time in history, as you said, Sarah, so appositely, we do have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. And of course, what's driving that is that populations are aging and shape-shifting. We're living for longer, and therefore we shall want a need to work for longer. And I think there's an interesting point to pull out around multi-generational and intergenerational, because the multi-generational workplace we know is extending and expanding. It has been the case for a while, but it is growing, and that was only going to go in one direction as we're living for longer. The same generational diversity, of course, applies not just to our workplace and our 5 generations at work, but also to the customers, consumers, and the wider stakeholders that all of our organizations and indeed our boards serve. So the question is, what does that look like in our organizations? What does that look like on our boards? Which gets to the point of, how are we thinking about the shift from the multi-generational reality? It's a simple human truth, if that's the context in which we're living, greater extended generational diversity. And how do we think about bonding and binding, the mutuality, the shared value, the greater collaboration that we know is true, and what it leads to in terms of untold benefits in terms of effectiveness, growth, productivity, innovation, etc., when we're able to generate more intergenerational dynamics, be it on boards and through our organization. So that's a big point around context, that yes, there is a reality, and yes, we can do something more positive and progressive with it. So in terms of that opportunity, the evidence of so much that we found in the research in the book, and as I say, that research was quant, it took place over 4 continents, didn't get quite to all 7 this time around, but hopefully next time. And as you said, Sarah, with an anthropological AI partner as well as part of that process. And this was a constant series of pulses of listening. What is the real discourse that we're having across these 5 generations? And we know that generational dynamic is loaded with so much bias, so many stereotypes, from the youngest to the oldest and everything in between. And so the case studies and examples and the outputs of the research in the book were very much born from maximizing mindsets of leadership. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the leadership teams in those organizations, or from other leaders across the organizations. And the second point, also a shift towards much more collaborative models of leadership, which are really looking to maximize the collective intelligence, whether that's in a business unit, within a team, on a board, or indeed at a more systemic level across the organization. So 3 things to share in the time we have. First of all, next generation boards, which I thought would be really interesting to put the spotlight on. And I'm sure there are a number of you on this call who are very familiar with next generation boards. You might have set one up, you might have encouraged somebody to serve on one, or again, it might be something that you've read about or heard about. Typically, next generation boards have been more prevalent in non-profit over the past years, typically known as a youth advisory board or youth council. 2 of the many case studies evidenced in the book actually are the EY Foundation that I've been deeply involved with over the past years, serving as one of the board of trustees, and Mission 44, which was recently set up by Sir Lewis Hamilton, as he's looking at really addressing greater diversity in terms of career paths into high-performing industries. And there are many others. But what's interesting in parallel with this is what we've seen in the rise of next generation boards in corporate. So there are countless examples from Gucci back in 2015, who were looking to hardwire it into their cultural and digital transformation at the time. They're in a different trajectory now, but it was really interesting around the work that was happening on the inside and what is the role that a next generation board played as part of that culture of purpose. Accor in hospitality, the Financial Times, the Pentland Group, all sectors and all types of organizations. And there are, again, countless examples. And the reason I wanted to share this is because, one, we know it works. It doesn't work when it's tokenistic. It doesn't work when we see it as a project or initiative, but it works because there is a common blueprint blueprint, and having researched hundreds of examples of next generation boards across the world, we know there is a shared blueprint that is very replicable. It's very straightforward and practical. What changes and flexes really is the purpose. Next generation can be wired to under 30s in many cases. So the intent really is to bring that sparring perspective with younger gens, with leadership teams and with boards. In other cases, it's looking at a broader next generation from a development, a succession, rising leadership. And that's the case with examples such as the Financial Times. So next generation boards was one solution and one platform for how we think more effectively about this and more progressively. There's another big bucket in the book around intergenerational alliances, which take different shapes and forms. But a lot of that is linked to how do we build the missing muscle? And by missing muscle, I talk about the collaborative muscle that really just isn't invested in organizations. So that's everything from how we look better at our employee resource groups, not just in terms of the singular purpose that they serve, but also their composition. How are they connected across the organization? How do they talk to each other in terms of that collective of ERGs? Intergenerational alliances, how we look at also family businesses, which are generational in construct. They thrive and are relevant from one generation to the next, through to specifically, and again, a group that is increasingly biased, and we've seen that rage in social media in recent months, older generations, and how do we unlock knowledge transfer for the benefit of the entire organization? And the final one is platforms, examples of platforms that are building collaboration and innovation. There's a great example in the book from LVMH. You mentioned it earlier, Sarah, owners of brands such as Dior, Sephora, Louis Vuitton, many more. And they invested in a platform for entrepreneurship across the entire organization. So that was interesting because it brought people together from different countries, cultures, roles, responsibilities, and levels of experience who would not otherwise have met. So that became an important horizontal and connector. So again, three sort of big examples and big areas of just some of the many solutions that we evidence. And so really, as we wrap up, it was to give a sense of, in writing a book, I really wanted to be part of the solution, and I wanted to open source those examples. And I think as we perhaps going into the breakout groups, and as you lead us into those, Sarah, perhaps thinking about how can we make a difference and in what time frame, because there are things that we can do as of now, in the everyday, short term, long term, whether it's making a business case for what we need to change as NEDs, because a lot of this really is about how do we solve for a more intergenerational workplace? Because what's evident in the book is that if we solve for a more intergenerational workplace that's more effective, we're solving for so many other things, be it collaboration, be it DEI, sustainability, how we attract, retain, motivate talent, and so on and so on. I'll share one example with you from next generation boards, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that stat from work that you've done. We also know next generation boards are invariably better models of dimensions of all dimensions of diversity than the board and the exec. So again, if we solve for more intergenerational workplaces and boards and how we think about organizations, we're solving for something much more progressive and productive and actually growth orientated over time. So I'll leave it at that, Sarah, as we lead out into the breakout groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you. That's got us all thinking. One of the things that really hit me on reading the book is I've actually witnessed a lot of generational moaning. I don't know if anyone else here has experienced that, but actually this book was the total antithesis to that. It was looking at how can we be really positive and hopeful in how we encourage that intergenerational working. And today we're really focusing on that from a board perspective, just like Rebecca's talk just now. Thank you so much. This is your chance to reflect on your own experience and views. So we've got 3 questions for you to consider. What generations are represented around your boardroom? What is the generational mix of your employee base, your customer base, your suppliers? There might be other stakeholders you think of too. Have you set up or been involved in any next generation or youth advisory boards or seen or heard of any? Have a few minutes now just to think about those questions yourself before we jump into breakout rooms.
So fantastic. I think first of all, Sarah, to your point, just coming off some fantastic conversations that we had in the breakout groups. First of all, no pet projects. Absolutely. We know when this goes wrong, and actually when this thinking doesn't work, is it's seen as a project or initiative, and it really doesn't have the right buy-in. For example, when it's tokenistic, it's something that we see in this say-do gap in so many cases in organisations and on boards. It's something that maybe the CEO or the chair is, oh, that's nice to have, and that's good signalling. This is not about signalling. This is something far deeper, and actually it has far greater positive effects in terms of some of the things that we've just been talking about. It doesn't work either when it's the secret project with an elite group of people with a CEO or a chair of a board either. So no pet projects, brilliant. I love that that came out early. It's a big consistency factor. And I think the outcome is it needs to be hardwired to the business strategy if we're setting up a next generation board. And as I've always said, it should be an investment over time. So I think that's one important thing. I love the point about future leaders. Absolutely. This is about, first of all, these are rising leaders in the making. They are the board members. I mean, it's 2024 and we still haven't solved gender diversity on a board, let alone anything else. My theory as well, and I think, Sarah, we have very much like minds on this, and I hear that a lot of people today, if we solve for more intergenerational effectiveness in how we do business, it's really about doing better business. And actually, this is about better boards, frankly. And actually, if we're solving for that, a lot of these things start to fall away. So I love the point about future leaders. Another interesting thing some people have said to me sometimes around, oh, Rebecca, but for next generation boards, they're typically anywhere between 10, 12, 14 members. It's for the few. And my argument to that is, and it will always be for the few, because we're not having boards that have 100 members. And yet, if you rotate it through cohorts, you've got cohorts of those people from 1 year to the next, or from 18 months to 18 months, number one. And number two, there's a halo effect of what that signals about how we're investing more effectively and who we're listening to and how we're listening. So that's a big point, which brings me to three. I love the point about learn to listen. I think in learn to listen as well, I think there's also unlearning, which I've seen firsthand of the unlearning that needs to happen. So how do we invest better in mutual learning from, again, everyone else around the board, if we're doing this for the first time and we are recalibrating, let's say, the composition of our board members, that is not just, oh, isn't it great to have two young trustees on the board? No, let's say what we do and do what we say. And that means everyone around the table. So I love those examples that just came up. I think one big miss point, and I say this all the time, is if the demographic of our customers and consumers, if that is not remotely reflected in the shape of our board and our leadership teams, there is something slightly wrong there, because it's not credible, it's not relevant, and it's certainly not future proof. Another point that I loved, which was also about risk and responsibility, and risk ostensibly does come up, and I think it was an interesting conversation there around where we need voting on boards, for example, if it's a next generation boards, which is not always the case, a different thing. But I do think the point is, again, we shouldn't be quick to make assumptions either way. What it does do is instill responsibility earlier. And I loved your point, finally, Sarah, on the value of both. I think absolutely there is a place. I think next generation boards, what I love about next generation boards, if going back to the point that we have not solved for gender diversity, let alone in 2024, all these things, they're not really shifting the needle. That was also part of my humble, okay, if I look back in the next 15 years and think, it's not just about next generation boards, but these are all practical solutions that hopefully, if every organization made one of these commitments, we would be seeing an uplift, because we're solving for that, because we know next generation boards are hands down more diverse than leadership teams and the boards that we've got at the moment. And I think finally, I think what I love about all the conversations, all of this is frankly just about doing better business and actually having better boards. And I don't know anyone, I love that point about board papers. I think also in the same way that we've seen with disability, and actually it's designing better for all of us. I think there's something here. If we design for age inclusivity, we're designing better for all of us. And I don't know any board member who would want more board papers. So I love that point as well. Actually, perhaps some good will come out of this in many different ways. So I'll close there. Hand back to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That's a great closing thought. I didn't expect that one. Super. I will stop recording now, but thank you so much for speaking to us, Rebecca, for getting this conversation going. I think for everyone, it's been really rich conversation.